By the time detectives learned of Annabelle Juarez's disappearance, she had already been gone for months. For almost 30 years, detectives had been trying to fill in the gaps and make up for lost time. On April 10, 1997, Margarita Gardner walked into the Odessa Police Department to file a missing persons report for her daughter, Annabelle Juarez. She told detectives that she hadn't heard from her daughter since January, and when she called after that, she only got Annabelle's husband, Oscar, on the phone. Oscar told her that he hadn't seen or heard from Annabelle since January 27, when she went to Ojinaga, Mexico. Odessa Police Detective Lauren Gonzalez explains what happened next. She did immediately indicate in her report that she suspected Oscar of doing something because she had disclosed that Annabelle had been staying with someone named Daniel Cobos at his house, and she gave all of his information, his address, and she had stated that in December of 1996, so 1 month before she went missing, that Oscar had told Margarita that he was going to kill Annabelle and Daniel Cobos. And she said this happened. He said this to her in person at her house. The question arises as to why Margarita was just now reporting Annabelle missing, if Oscar had threatened her back in December. But it's not as clear-cut as it may seem. When reporters talked with Annabelle's sister, Jeanette, over the phone, she claimed that they had tried to report her missing sooner, but it was the police who wouldn't take the report until April 10th. Jeanette recalled, "I called the police department in Odessa several times, and they would not even take the report or the information because they said that I lived out of state. So at that point in time, then I contacted my mother. She called them, and she tried to do the report. They would not take her report because she had to be missing at least 48 hours. Jeanette said that officers wanted her mother to call all their family, friends, anyone who might know where Annabelle was, before they would take the report. There didn't seem to be any urgency, despite Jeanette and her mother knowing that Annabelle would never leave her 2 young children behind for months. It was extremely frustrating because my mother mostly had to do all of the legwork. She had to run around. She went to Mexico, talked to family. She was on the phone. She was just trying to look everywhere for her and checking with everyone she could think of, and nobody had seen or heard anything from her." After the report was made by Margarita, a couple of officers came forward and said that Oscar Juarez had come to the police department asking to make a missing persons report, but the context of their conversations with him was that she had left him and run off to Mexico. The officers told him that if she went of her own free will to Mexico, if his wife left him, that wasn't considered a missing person. One of the officers documented that he had actually come in and tried to report her missing the day that he said she left. Some of these officers were very familiar with Oscar because he was a confidential narcotics informant, and they had regular contact with him already. Knowing the information they were getting behind the scenes from him, one can see how it likely colored every interaction after when her family would try and call and relay some kind of urgency. Police were assuming she'd come back, but she hadn't after all this time. Hearing about the threats Oscar had made now in April, detectives got to work, and they had a lot of lost time to make up for. They basically had to work backwards in order to move forward in Annabelle's case. A really big piece of evidence that does corroborate the time frame are the phone records that we do have. That does show that the last time Annabelle talked to her family outside of her husband, Oscar, there are calls that are time-stamped and dated January 25th when she talked to her sister in Florida, approximately around 4:30 p.m. And then she called to her sister in Florida, approximately around 4. Her mother Margarita in Monaghan's later that evening. And so we can kind of pinpoint that is when someone other than Oscar heard from her. Jeanette confirmed that the last time she talked to her sister was around that time. She remembered her sister telling her she wanted to leave Odessa and Oscar and take her kids with her. Jeanette even offered to let them come stay with her in Florida, but Annabelle couldn't leave right then. She needed to wait a little bit until some money came in so Jeanette could help pay for the move. By the time Jeanette had the money, Annabelle was gone, and no one had the faintest idea where to even begin looking for her. As far as I know, there's no documented searches because there were no leads as to where to begin. We're in the middle of the desert here. It's huge. It's a lot of brush, a lot of sand dunes. Witness canvassing was done later on in April and May, but so much time had passed that a lot of generalized time frames were given by neighbors. Oh, sometime around Christmas, sometime right before the New Year. things like that. Not real days, not real concrete timeframes, which is really just detrimental and devastating in a case like this. While there was nothing concrete, there were a few people that said they knew Annabelle was trying to leave Oscar. Detectives found it was pretty common knowledge that Annabelle was separated from him, and sometime in December had moved her and her kids into her potential new boyfriend's place. That new boyfriend was a man named Daniel Kobos, and that was about a month before she went missing. When they finally did get to talk to Oscar, he even corroborated that. He does mention that she had been living with Danny Kobos, but that she had stayed there for approximately 2 weeks, and that around that same time, she was very depressed, and she'd been seeking mental health. She had sought mental health treatment. Jeanette said she wasn't aware that her sister had ever seriously struggled with her mental health or sought professional treatment outside of just dealing with general anxiety from all the drama with Oscar. There was plenty of drama that spanned years since the two of them had known one another since Annabelle was just a kid. He said they'd been together for 9 years. They met in Presidio. When they met and became neighbors, she was like maybe 12 years old, but they were just neighbors. Oscar told detectives that they met because Annabelle was selling drugs. That's how they'd gotten involved with one another. Though exactly when that was isn't entirely clear. It seems like maybe it was when she was a bit older, maybe when she was 20. Maybe around then they got together because she was 29 when she went missing. They did not get married until after she had Diamond, their first child together. By this time, Oscar already had older children with other people. According to Oscar, despite the separation, he and Annabelle were trying to reconcile. He says they connected about getting back together on Saturday, January 25th, around the same time that she last spoke to her mother and sister. And then the next day, the 26th, Annabelle told him she was pregnant. He called it a tubular pregnancy. What he probably meant was an ectopic pregnancy. She tells him she needs to terminate the pregnancy. So she says she was going to go see Dr. Pina Molino in Juarez, Mexico, and that she was going to leave the kids with him because he was a good father. She got on the phone and started trying to find prices for bus tickets. Oscar told detectives he gave Annabelle some money, asked how long she was going to be gone. She just said about 3 or 4 weeks. He said she was planning to go to Juarez to see the doctor, and then she was going to go visit her grandmother in Ojinaga. When she was ready, she would call him so he could pick her up. But it's obviously been far more than 4 weeks at this point. Some early reporting on this case claims that Oscar's story changed from Ojinaga to Juarez. But Detective Gonzalez claims Oscar maintained that Annabelle was going to Juarez first, and then planned to go to Ojinaga after. And that was always the plan. Regardless, Oscar told them that the next day, January 27th, Annabelle got up early and left. He told detectives that he gave Annabelle a hug and a kiss goodbye, but he didn't actually go out and help her carry her bags to the truck that was outside waiting for her. He just kind of peeked out from behind the curtain in their house and watched as Annabelle loaded her stuff in and then took off. He described the bags that she took. He said a brown suitcase and a blue and white diaper bag, and that she got into a white Chevy pickup truck, specifically a 71 Chevrolet short bed pickup truck, and that a woman was with her and got in the driver's seat, and Annabelle got into the driver's passenger seat. He said that he did not know who this other woman was. Oscar said he never got a good look at the woman in the white pickup. He just told them that she looked to be of Hispanic descent. That's where Oscar's helpful information ended. He said that he stayed back with their kids and waited for a call that never came. After talking to Oscar and digging more into the circumstances, before Annabelle's disappearance, detectives learned that Annabelle was part of an active lawsuit. She and her sister were in the middle of a wrongful death suit against a nursing home for the death of their father in 1995. It turns out that those attorneys had actually hired a private investigator, according to Jeanette. She knows this because that guy that was hired just so happened to be Jeanette's ex-husband, a guy named John Parker. So naturally, when Annabelle came up missing, John started poking around, especially in those early months when police wouldn't take the report. Once he knew they were looking into her disappearance, though, he freely shared everything he had found. I do have all of the reports. And the private investigator actually spoke to Oscar before police detectives. So in his report, he talks about that Oscar had nothing but nice things to say about Daniel Kobos, that he was happy for them to go on and have a life together and things like that. John noted that sentiment is strange in his report because it was contrary to what Oscar had reportedly told Margarita. So someone's exaggerating or not being entirely truthful there. That was a big thing that the private investigator was really kind of harping on there. The stories are made more drastically different when one learns that Margarita told John that the reason Oscar gave for wanting to kill Annabelle and Daniel Kobos wasn't just because she was living with him. Allegedly, it was because it was Daniel's child she'd been pregnant with, though there's no way to prove paternity with Annabelle missing. Parker also reported that Margarita Gardner said that she had seen a shovel in Oscar's car, which is not something she had put in her original report, but it is something that Parker had told police. He expressed to detectives that he was suspicious of Oscar, that Oscar was generally very nervous when he talked to Parker. On May 13th, detectives finally did what they honestly probably should have done right after talking to Oscar. They went and spoke to Daniel Kobos. Daniel Kobos was also from Presidio, and in approximately November 1996, they reconnected after he found out she was living in Odessa again, and she had told him that she was married but separating from her husband, Oscar. This is almost 6 months after she disappears, so he's not able to give really concrete times, but he estimates that approximately a week before Christmas is when she moved into his house. The kids were living there with her and him, and then shortly after moving in, he said that she went on a trip with her mother to Del Rio, Texas, which is another border town, and then she moved out of his house because she was going to seek treatment at a place called Glenwood Hospital. Glenwood Hospital isn't around anymore, so she must have not been there long, because right before New Year's, she went back to Daniel Kobos and moved back in again. He reported that in the evening of New Year's Day, Oscar had called Daniel and threatened him and threatened to hurt his son. Daniel told detectives the reason he didn't report Annabelle missing was because they'd kind of broken things off. He'd asked her to move out because of her marijuana usage and mood swings. The last he knew was that she and her kids moved back into the house with Oscar. He'd actually been the one to give her a ride back home to Oscar, even though Annabelle at times had been scared of him. He said that he knew Oscar had been physically violent with her in the past, though this is the only statement backing that up. He couldn't remember the exact date that she moved out, but he said that it was sometime in January, though he did see her at least one more time when she'd shown up at his work to tell him that she might be pregnant. She wouldn't know the test results for a few days, but she wanted to give him a heads up. He told detectives that that conversation wasn't actually bad. He told her that he was willing to figure something out if she was in fact pregnant with his child. Once investigators were done talking to Daniel, they were totally done with him. They didn't think he was suspicious, and they actually didn't bring him in for any further questioning. They were much more interested in Oscar, but things kind of dead-ended when they went to confront Oscar, and he denied ever even threatening Daniel or Annabelle. They were left to try and find other people who knew Annabelle, who might have seen or heard something in the time leading up to her disappearance. They ended up talking to a neighbor who claimed that sometime in December, though they didn't remember the specifics, Oscar told this neighbor that Annabelle was in Juarez at a behavioral health hospital. This was around the time that Annabelle did go out of town for a hospital visit, at least according to Daniel. But Daniel had said that she'd gone to Del Rio in Texas, and that's like over 400 miles away from Juarez. So it's not like they're just nearby cities or getting confused. That same neighbor noticed that Oscar had started selling some of his and Annabelle's things in March. She'd only been gone for a few months by all accounts at that point. Oscar had acted like she was coming back, so it was weird to see him getting rid of all her stuff. One of Annabelle's best friends, Manuela Pina, offered more insight into weird activity going on at Annabelle's house, not necessarily related to Oscar though. She made statements to the police that she had been at Annabelle's house, and there would be men coming around looking for money, that they would knock on the door, and she would say, "Tell them that we're not home," and she would get the impression that they were after money. Manuela told detectives she didn't know who they were there for, but she assumed it was drug-related because she knew Annabelle used marijuana. She had never actually seen her use the drug, but what she did see was Oscar get physically violent with Annabelle. She didn't say when this happened, just that she'd seen it. She knew about Annabelle's pregnancy, though she also believed Annabelle was pregnant with Daniel Kobos' baby. But Manuela said that Annabelle was just trying to get a pregnancy test. She didn't even know if it was confirmed. When she called the house to see if Annabelle needed a ride to go get a pregnancy test, it was Oscar who answered. He told her that Annabelle had just left for a couple of weeks. But then later, she said his story changed, and he told her it would actually be 6 weeks and that she was in Ojinaga. But between scheduling and him being a no-show at least once, it didn't happen until like a month later on July 10th. By that point, they had plenty of things to ask him about. Looking at the polygraph examination report, it is absolutely meaningless. There is no narrative written about their conversation. There is no list of questions asked. All it says is, no deception indicated. He can say he passed a polygraph all he wants. It doesn't mean anything in the investigation. Back then, it must have meant something. Or they didn't know where else to go. Because once he passed his polygraph and detectives finished talking to neighbors and friends, they labeled Annabelle's case inactive. That was July 24th, 1997. In 2001, investigators made sure that her case got entered into the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services. That way, if she came through the system in another state, she'd pop up as a missing person in Texas. They also tried to get enough DNA samples from her family into Cody's, just in case an unidentified body was ever found somewhere that would match to her. But they were met with some obstacles there. In 2001, a DNA sample was collected from Annabelle's daughter, Diamond, and entered into Cody's to begin the familial DNA Cody search. It did indicate that additional family DNA profiles were recommended to make a stronger genealogical profile. A detective contacted Annabelle's sister, but she stated she preferred investigators get a sample from Annabelle's son first, although Jeanette disputes that and says that nobody ever asked her for a sample. So the detective contacted Oscar and told him they needed a DNA sample from their son, and he said, sorry, he was leaving for the military, so that was that. Annabelle's case went cold until Detective Gonzalez herself got involved and started working the case in February 2022. It was very small, and I realized she's still missing. That was the first case where I started to get my feet wet with familial DNA and stuff. After splitting her time between leading new and cold cases, Detective Gonzalez finally requested to focus all her time solely on the cold ones. Since January of this year, she has been able to devote more time to Annabelle's case. When I went through the file, there were those huge gaps in time where this is not being revisited. And I do think that is part that bothered me, is like, we put it in a drawer, we forgot about it. No one's doing anything. And yeah, I mean, look at this picture. Look at that. That was like within a year before she went missing. Like, and her kids. I mean, come on. Come on. When it came to looking at what evidence they did have, there wasn't much. The most crucial piece that Detective Gonzalez found were those phone records, the ones confirming the last time Annabelle talked to her mother and sister. But thankfully, there were also those files from P.I. John, who went the extra mile. John Parker also physically searched the caller ID on the physical home phone and had found that that morning at 6:25 a.m., there was a call to a number attached to a name that wasn't associated with Annabelle or her family and friends. But the PI didn't leave it at that. Detective Gonzalez learned that he'd called the number, and the person on the other end said they didn't know Annabelle or Oscar. Unfortunately, it was hard to tell if Annabelle was calling that number or being called by that number, but this unknown call was made the morning that Annabelle went missing on January 27th, so it seems important. The other thing Detective Gonzalez noted in Annabelle's small file was that back in 2010, there was some kind of notice given to their department about a Jane Doe that had been found. He was notified that an unidentified body of a pregnant woman had been located on South Padre Island in 1998. So that would have been a year after Annabelle was reported missing. And, her being pregnant, it was speculated, maybe, is this going to be possibly Annabelle? As Detective Gonzalez was looking at that file now, it was unclear if detectives ever got DNA from their Jane Doe to compare with Annabelle's DNA and Cody's. I contacted the Texas DPS Missing Persons Clearinghouse, and they did verify to me that that person, those remains they found, were positively identified in 2012 as someone other than Annabelle. Detective Gonzalez found that the South Padre Island Jane Doe was identified as Tammy L. Glaze from Springfield, Missouri, so not Annabelle. Next, Detective Gonzalez wanted to make sure that all the DNA bases were covered in Annabelle's case. That meant getting more familial DNA samples. She sent out a Texas Ranger to collect DNA from Jeanette and Margarita, and those were entered into Cody's. But again, there were no hits, meaning that if Annabelle's remains have been found, her DNA hasn't been entered into Cody's. In addition to her DNA search, Detective Gonzalez was also tracking down more information from the people originally interviewed if they were still around. Her goal was to see if they corroborated their original statements or had something different to share. Margarita did mention that Oscar had told Margarita that Annabelle was pregnant, but Annabelle had never told her that herself. She also stated that Margarita had gone. She had gone to Juarez herself to talk to Dr. Jesus Pina, is how she remembered his name, and that she remembered him being nervous and made all the nurses leave before he would talk to her about Annabelle. And it was pretty vague. I didn't have much context for that. I didn't have, seen her when, while during that time, she was disappeared. Margarita couldn't really provide a lot of those really burning details that I wanted about Dr. Pina. Detective Gonzalez also said that there were no details that Annabelle even went to a clinic and got a positive pregnancy test, meaning that the story Oscar had doesn't totally ring true. It's unlikely she would have known if her pregnancy was ectopic when she disappeared. Now, everything around her pregnancy is just hearsay, primarily from Oscar and Daniel. As far as what I have, law enforcement never got in contact with Dr. Pena, so that is a big piece of the puzzle. I have not been able to find any records for it, but maybe someone in Mexico or El Paso or somewhere near there knows something. Maybe that was their doctor. Maybe he's still alive. The family talks about him as being Dr. Pena, spelled P-I-N-A. Pina is more common, but they are adamant it's P-I-A. Jesus was his first name. Molina might be a second last name, might be middle name. But the address they gave was the intersection of Carrera Terra and Porvenir in Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. When you look this up on Google Maps, there is one street in Juarez called Porvenir. But this street is more of an alleyway, and it's a pretty residential area now. As of today, Detective Gonzalez hasn't been able to track down this doctor. She doesn't know if he's alive or if he's even real, but that doesn't mean she's not out there looking for him. Yes, I'm looking for a Dr. Jesus Pina, or Dr. Jesus Molina Pena, or Pena Molina, who worked near Porvenir Street in Juarez in the 1990s, and he was practicing with a Dr. Carlos Collin, and the sign on the location just said, Servicios Medicos. Essentially, detectives believe that Dr. Pena could have been a family doctor, and someone who Annabelle went to. There's just no information at all verifying that Annabelle was treated or seen by him in the late January timeframe. Detective Gonzalez also went back and spoke with John Parker, the PI who'd initially said that he'd talked to Dr. Pena. There's an article that claims that he took several trips to Mexico looking for Annabelle and that he did talk to the doctor. But now when Detective Gonzalez spoke with him, he said that he didn't recall ever going to Mexico at all to investigate. When reporters asked Jeanette if her ex-husband had gone to Mexico, her ex-husband being John Parker, the PI, she said no, that it had always just been her mother, Margarita, that had gone looking for Annabelle in Mexico. Margarita allegedly did speak to Dr. Pena, Jeanette said. She said she did find him, and he told her that he never saw her, that he hadn't seen her in years. I remember my mom mentioning that she did think that he was nervous, but I don't know for sure, because I wasn't there. I don't know. When Detective Gonzalez talked to Jeanette, she was eager to pass on any files she'd gotten from John. Her files were easier to go through because they'd all been typed out and saved in a PDF. The report he'd given police was mostly just handwritten notes. Jeanette also pointed Detective Gonzalez to someone who was never interviewed by or spoke to police, a woman named Mary Lou Manriquez Cobos. She was one of Annabelle's good friends, so close that Mary Lou knew her friend was living with her husband's cousin Danny. The case of Annabelle Juarez remains one of the most challenging missing person investigations in Odessa, Texas. What began as a delayed report in April 1997 has evolved into a decades-long search for answers that continues today under Detective Gonzalez's dedicated leadership. The initial delays in taking the family's concerns seriously created crucial gaps in the timeline that investigators are still working to fill. The conflicting accounts from Oscar about Annabelle's departure, combined with his history as a police informant and the threats he allegedly made, have kept him at the center of suspicion throughout the investigation. Yet, despite polygraph tests, witness interviews, and forensic advances, no definitive evidence has emerged to confirm what happened to the 29-year-old mother of two. Detective Gonzalez's renewed focus on the case has brought fresh energy to the investigation. Her efforts to expand the DNA database, track down previously overlooked witnesses, and locate the mysterious Dr. Pina represent the kind of thorough police work that gives families hope for resolution. The mysterious phone call made on the morning of Annabelle's disappearance and the ongoing search for the doctor who may have never existed demonstrate how many questions remain unanswered. For Annabelle's children, now adults, who have lived most of their lives without their mother, and for her sister Janette and mother Margarita, the passage of time has not diminished their need for answers. The case serves as a stark reminder of how crucial the first hours and days are in a missing person investigation, and how the assumptions made by law enforcement can have lasting consequences. Whether Annabelle Juarez left voluntarily for Mexico, as Oscar claimed, fell victim to violence, or met some other fate remains unknown. But Detective Gonzalez's commitment to uncovering the truth ensures that Annabelle's case will not be forgotten, and that somewhere, someone may still come forward with the information needed to finally bring closure to this enduring mystery. Until that day, the search for Annabelle Juarez continues, driven by the unwavering determination of those who refuse to let her disappearance remain unsolved.